Okay, let's get into brain differences. Do you think that men and women's brains are different? There's quite a claim that there aren't. Again, a lot of the pop psychology stuff claims that there is. Do men and women think differently? Are their brains different? What do you think? How are they different? Let's pause the video and just talk about that question. Okay, now let's break the question down into some of the more specific claims that have been made about male and female brains. And I'll have you pause again and discuss these in a minute. So supposedly it's claimed women's brain use is more global. So whether if they're using language or doing something, supposedly it's spread out through more parts of their brain than in men. So they use their brain more globally, their brains are more interconnected, and they use more of their brain to do the same thing than men. So it's been claimed that women have larger corpus callosum. That is connective tissue between the left and right hemispheres of the brain. You see the picture there. It allows the two hemispheres to communicate with each other. Messages go through the corpus callosum from left to right sides of the brain hemispheres. It's been claimed that women have a larger corpus callosum and thus they use their brain more globally, and they can also multitask better. So because they are wired differently and because they have a bigger corpus callosum, they can multitask better, drive while talking, or cook food while talking on the phone and reading something. Women can multitask better. And they have larger, better verbal centers. Verbal centers are language centers in their brains. Do you agree with these? Do these make sense? Are these correct? What do you think the science says about them? Pause the video and discuss this for a while. The claims that women's brains are wired differently, this is where a lot of the psychology research has been greatly distorted, misinterpreted, even exaggerated by popular news media and pop psychologists. They have completely misinterpreted scientific studies about the brain, men and women's brains. There was once a study a long time ago, I think in the 1990s, that supposedly claimed that women had a larger corpus callosum. It was a poorly done study. It was later disproven by other studies, and yet that old study continues to get repeated in the news media and in pop psychology sources. It is not true that they are wired differently or they can multitask better. There have been findings of some differences in male and female brains, but they are very, very fine-grained differences, and you can't generalize because even among men or among women, there are differences in brain regions. So it's really hard to talk meaningfully about male-female brains when there's a lot of individual differences, a lot of individual variation. And the brain differences that do exist are kind of very fine, minor differences that won't affect, well, it's not clear if they would affect behavior or intellectual abilities, or it could be that they're caused by behavior. A famous study showed of London cab drivers, London taxi drivers, showed that they had the area of their brain for memorizing kind of like your distances and directions and where things are was bigger than in normal people. So you think, some people are born with a bigger kind of geography location in their brain, and so they'll probably get jobs as taxi drivers. No, because as taxi drivers, they have to know every single street in London. That part of their brain has become bigger because they have used it so much. They have to really memorize every single street in London and know where every street is. you have to in order to get a job as a taxi driver in London. And so yes, London taxi drivers have a bigger part of their brain that's devoted to spatial locations and other people because they've used it more. And so you can't just look at someone's brain and say, oh, that's because of genetics. It might be because of usage, experience. Okay, so cognitive differences. There have been claims of cognitive differences between men and women. Women have better verbal skills. Let me tell you offhand, okay, women have better verbal skills, women are better at multitasking. Well, we've talked about that. That's not exactly true. At least there's not much evidence for it. In general, humans are not good at multitasking, at least true multitasking. You can multitask if it's mindless activities. So if you're an experienced driver and you're driving on the highway, you don't have to pay attention as long as nothing is happening on the road. And you can multitask doing that and maybe a conversation with someone and listening to the radio, as long as there's nothing that really demands your attention. Nothing demands a lot of cognitive attention. But once something does, like something happens on the road, you have to shut out everything else. You cannot truly multitask when it comes to things that really require cognitive attention. So multitasking is kind of an overrated thing. Humans in general just don't multitask very well. And the research about women, and multitasking, I think, has been exaggerated and misunderstood. So that leaves the following claims. Women are better at verbal skills, men are better at math, men are better at mental rotation. So mental rotation is, for example, you see an object and you can imagine what it's going to look like. You can just imagine in your head mentally rotating it and what it's going to look like from a different direction or a different angle. And this relates to maybe reading a map. So when my wife and I had been married a few years, this is before, before navigation apps were a thing. Didn't exist back then. This was before smartphones. We could go to the internet and go to a map website and get directions to a place. So we're going to drive down from Illinois to my parents' place, which is about a 9-hour drive back then. And I just got some printouts of the maps for certain places where we need to change from one highway to the other. Not actual directions that says turn left, turn right here. And my wife was upset because she said, no, I want directions that say do this, do that. I'm like, why can't you read a map? Well, I can imagine if the map shows you going like this, but in the car, I had to mentally rotate and think, okay, on the road, do I go this way or this way when I get to that intersection? I can do mental rotation. And that relates to spatial reasoning, spatial ability, your ability to think about spaces and maybe reading a map. Is it because, now obviously I had better map reading abilities and better mental rotation, but is it because I'm a male? Or is there some other explanation? How about the claim that men are better at math? We see more men in math-based fields like engineering and physics. Is it because men have a natural advantage there? Do women have a natural advantage at language skills and go into language-related careers? Is that the reason? Well, let's pause the video and discuss this for a while. What do you think? These are complicated questions. All right, first question. Even though I'm a linguist, I'm going to have to say I'm not quite sure whether women have better verbal skills. I think it's a simplistic question. I think you have to consider different parts of language and different age levels and different types of language ability. And it's a complicated issue, actually, and I'm going to say this is one area of linguistics I've not looked at. So I'm going to say I don't know, but I'll leave it up to you if you're interested to look into this and see. Intuitively, I would say yes, but I'm not aware of any solid scientific evidence for it. I've heard of course, some claims of education research that shows that girls have better skills at, children than boys of the same age. But I need to look into that more, so I'm not sure. Men are better at math? Well, it's just that traditionally men were boys, and men were more encouraged to take math classes. They were encouraged, when they did well in math classes, they were encouraged to go into math and science related careers and to do college majors. This includes encouragement from teachers and from parents. Girls tended to be discouraged. Parents and teachers tended to discourage girls from going into math and science fields, taking math and science classes, or if they did well, they were not given encouragement and praise like their male classmates. There's plenty of research that shows this. So the fact that men seem to be better at math is a cultural thing. It is not due to sex differences, probably, very likely. There isn't any reason to think that men are naturally better at math. There's in fact no scientific evidence for any general cognitive differences between men and women, large cognitive differences. So it is not really true that men are better at math. It's just women haven't had good role models. They haven't had access to math and science education. They haven't, culturally they've been discouraged from those fields. That's starting to change, at least in the West, and I hope it changes more. So you notice that engineering departments are largely male students, male professors. And women, they were encouraged or allowed to go to more education fields, teachers, language fields, more stereotypically feminine or female kinds of careers and majors than men. Fourth one, men are better at mental rotation, was the fact that I was better than my wife at mental rotation and map reading tasks, map reading skills. Can you think of a different explanation? When I was in my PhD program, I took a course, or I read actually some psychology papers, at least one or two, showing that in computer tasks in the psychology lab, yes, men did better at mental rotation tasks, puzzles on a computer screen, where they had to ask questions, what's this going to look like when you mentally rotate it? Is it because of differences that men and women are born with, innate differences? Or can you think of a better explanation? I actually want you to pause the video and think, is there a better explanation or a different explanation other than genetics for psychology studies showing that men do better than women in mental rotation tasks? Okay. Do you think of anything? Okay, I haven't looked into the research on that particular question, but I can think of a couple of things. Do parents, especially fathers, play with their boys differently than with the girls? At least in my culture, that's the way it was. That may be different today. I have a son. I don't have a daughter. I just have one son. But I play with him very physically, and that might include spinning him around, picking him up, and things like that. And maybe fathers traditionally wouldn't do that as much with the girls. And fathers would teach their boys sports. Hey, let's go out and play baseball. Learn to hit a baseball and throw a football or kick a soccer ball and things like that. And men were taught to read maps because more often men did driving, especially long distance driving. As a child, I learned to read a map. As a child and teenager, I learned how to read a map. Apparently my wife, she just wasn't taught to read a map the way that I was, for whatever reasons. I don't think it's just cultural differences. I think it's differences in how boys and girls were raised back then. So naturally, all my life, I've known how to read a map and how to mentally rotate things and translate it to how I'm driving in the car and which way I need to turn. Again, I don't know the actual research, but I think that we could just think of those explanations offhand as better explanations, or at least plausible explanations for why men might be better at this stuff. Now, there are academic debates on sex differences. including cognitive differences. And a lot of this gets misunderstood by the popular media and by pop psychologists. Steven Pinker is a cognitive psychologist and linguist at Harvard. He used to be at MIT, and I don't know why he moved down to Harvard. I think MIT is a better school. And then his colleague Elizabeth Spelke, I think, is also at Harvard. So Spelke takes a strong position that there are no cognitive differences at all between males and females. And then it's all a matter of culture, how boys and girls are raised and such. Steven Pinker takes a somewhat different stand, but it's often misunderstood, misinterpreted. He does not claim that there are any general or large cognitive differences. He's very clear about that. He says that globally, men and women are equally intelligent and equally capable. In fact, he is a liberal and a pro-feminist. He's very much for women's rights. He's very clear about that. But he does say that there are maybe fine-grained differences. And he still maintains that there may be an innate, that men might actually have an inborn superiority at mental rotation. But he's talking about minor, very fine-grained little differences, very little differences. And that's what the debate is about. Are there maybe little differences? Not big differences, but just little differences. So the assumption is men and women are equally intelligent. There's no big cognitive differences. The debate is whether there may be some little minor differences. And Spelke says none at all. Pinker says there's some. But they don't justify discrimination in hiring or any kind of discrimination. But this gets misunderstood. So we talked about the more authoritarian political correctness crowd, or the regressive left. So they will misinterpret Pinker and say Pinker is justifying sexism and discrimination, and he is not. They completely misunderstand what Pinker is saying. They think Pinker is talking about major cognitive differences. He's very clear he's not talking about that. He's talking about some little differences. And they will criticize Pinker. People on the far right who believe in traditional gender roles or sex roles, very conservative views on sex and gender roles, will cite Pinker to support their views, which is crazy because obviously they don't understand what he's saying. And it looks really silly because actually Pinker is a feminist, he's an atheist, very liberal, progressive. So it looks silly if a person on the right like that is quoting Pinker to support their views about gender issues, when Pinker is a very liberal, atheist, humanist, feminist, pro-feminist person. Read his books. There are other positions where the regressive left will criticize Pinker because they misunderstand him. Okay, we'll pause there, and in the next segment we're going to look at some particular issues of particular gender issues, particular questions, and I want you to discuss them. I'm not going to have any answers, not many answers. I just want you to think about them. So we'll do that in the next video segment. Okay, see you then.